Give you an overview of what I'll discuss. I'll first go over the U.S. free trade agreements in general, just give you a background information on that. And then we'll go into the benefits of the Central American Agreement, basically the duty benefits, when to use this agreement, and how to use this agreement. Now, the United States has entered into U.S. free trade agreements in order to open foreign markets to U.S. products. A large way this happens is because free trade agreements lower and eliminate tariffs on U.S.-made goods that qualify under the agreements. The agreements increase trade between the countries. It increases U.S. competitiveness within that country. There's often clauses to improve intellectual property right regulations within the country that we are partnering with. There's also clauses to open foreign government procurement to U.S.-made goods and to open the service and investment markets to the U.S. companies. Currently, there are 7 U.S. free trade agreements in force that your company can take advantage of. The first one was actually with Israel in 1985. I'm sure you're all familiar with NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement. And then we do also have FTAs with Jordan, Chile, Singapore, Australia, and most recently with Morocco, which actually entered into force at the beginning of this month. We have finished negotiating with Bahrain, Oman, and of course the Central American region, and we are now waiting for those agreements to be implemented and to enter into force, which will happen in the near future, hopefully. We're also still negotiating free trade agreements with the following regions and countries, as you see here with the Andean region, with the United Arab Emirates, with Panama, Thailand, the South African Customs Union, the countries are listed there, and there's also the Free Trade Agreement of the Americas. Those are all just currently being negotiated. Now, when you want to take advantage of these free trade agreements, it's important to understand the fact that they all have a rules of origin requirements. And the rules of origin within each agreement will define those requirements for how a product will qualify in order to take advantage and get preferential treatment. And this is unique to each agreement, so you need to be familiar with each one. Although the format is usually the same, there's always going to be unique rules, so that's why you have to be very familiar and check the actual agreement. Now, products will have to qualify to take advantage of the agreement, and if they're made in the U.S., they do not automatically qualify. Just because a product's manufactured here doesn't make it automatically qualify, though that is one step to qualifying. Instead, the good will have to meet the specific requirements. Additionally, your product does not have to qualify for preferential treatment under the FTA to ship to that country. You can still do business just like you did prior to this agreement going into force. The only difference is you won't be able to benefit from the agreement if you do not qualify under the rules of origin. We recommend 4 steps to follow when determining if your product does qualify and determining that it does. First would be to determine the harmonized tariff code. Next, you'd want to look at the actual duty benefit by comparing the most favored nation-based duty rate with the FTA preferential duty rate. Then you'll have to look up the rule of origin itself and then do the work to determine if your product meets the requirements prescribed in the rule of origin. Now, the HS number is the harmonized schedule number, and that is a number that classifies products for customs purposes. It's typically 6 to 10 digits long. For most countries, the first 6 digits of that code will be harmonized, hence the name, and it makes them all identical for each country within those first 6 digits. And that number is also very important for looking up the product-specific rules to determine if your good originates. I'll go more into that shortly. So the first step will be to look at the duty benefits. So each free trade agreement has a tariff elimination schedule. Under the CAFTA DR, there are separate tariff elimination schedules for each country. And so you'll look at this schedule to determine what the duty rate will be under the agreement. The tariff elimination schedules are set up by staging categories. These categories are labeled as A through Y, and each letter will correspond to a time frame for the calculated duty reduction. And these letters will actually appear within the tariff schedule, as you'll see. I have an example in this next slide. Here's the Costa Rican tariff elimination schedule, an example of it. You'll see the HS number in the first column. That's 870510 for crane lorries. So this is at least for this example. And you'll note it says in the third column that the base rate, or the MFN rate, is 15%. And then this is classified as staging category A. So under this, when the agreement, Central American Free Trade Agreement, goes into effect for Costa Rica, at that time, this duty on this product would become 0%. That's what the A means. Upon enforcement, goes automatically to 0. The other letters here, like M and B, that'll mean that the duties are reduced over a certain time period as prescribed within the definition for that specific category. Now, once you've determined you have a benefit, like in our example here, there would be the benefit of getting 0 duties on your crane lorries versus 15%. You'll then want to refer to Chapter 4 of the agreement and Annex 4.1 of the agreement to look up the specific rules of origin. And the person who should be responsible for that should be somebody at the company that actually produced the goods, since they will know where the materials came from that they used to produce the good, as well as the costs and the production process. So they're the ones that are really the experts to determine if their good qualifies, since they have all the information. Then to understand what an originating good is, there's various ways a product could qualify. One would be if it's wholly obtained or produced entirely in the territory. A good like that would be considered originating. Very few manufactured goods are going to be considered wholly obtained. That's more for things taken from the ground, like agricultural products, things actually grown or part of the territory. So most manufactured goods are going to have to meet the next criterion, which are the tariff classification change is one, or regional value content, or possibly both tariff shift and regional value content. These are product-specific rules, so you'd have to look it up for your product and then see which rule applies. A tariff shift is, as I just mentioned, product-specific. And what that means is that when you use any foreign materials to manufacture your good, they must undergo basically substantial transformation that shift their tariff classification from one to the finished good. So if you imported raw materials like steel under Chapter 72 and your finished good was classified under Chapter 85 with the 6 digits, that would have shifted from one tariff classification to the next. The regional value content, this is where the rule may require that the product contain a specific amount or percentage of originating content. This rule will only apply if this option actually will only apply if the product-specific rule of origin states that this is a requirement or an option for you. You may have a tariff shift requirement and you can't meet that. It may give you the option of doing regional value content, or it may just all around require it. But you have to check specifically to see if this is an option for you. As for documentation, this agreement is different from NAFTA, which you're all probably familiar with, where we have the NAFTA certificate of origin that the exporter would have to fill out in order to benefit and get the preferential treatment. Under this agreement, it's actually the importer that will be claiming preferential treatment, and there is no official certificate of origin like under NAFTA. It's really no format prescribed. You can do it how you wish, as long as it has the necessary information. And what documentation will be required on importation will be determined by each country at a later date. And then here's our contact information. We have Dan, me, and Mark Siegelman also there, so we're all there. I noticed I forgot to put my email address. Mine's the same as Dan's, just put my name in place of his, and that'll work. But otherwise, I know there's a lot of information, so feel free to contact us, and we can try to help you understand this all better. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Anthony. And now we'll have a sampling of the more than 50 questions submitted by our participants. It's obvious that you've generated some interest. The number one question is, could they have a copy of the presentation? Dan, Anthony, your presentation is available. Shall I email you?
That's fine. I'm not sure how you want to provide those, but I can send it out. If people send me emails, I can provide my presentation. I'm sure Anthony can do the same.
That's correct.
That would be super. And again, Anthony's email is anthony.grasso@mail.doc.gov, just as Daniel Thompson is above. Okay, first question from Bashir. He'd like to know, does the agreement apply for environmental equipment manufactured in the U.S.?
Why don't I ask Mark Siegelman to address that question? Mark?
Sure, this is Mark. The agreement basically covers all equipment. Just a matter of whether the product is eligible for immediate duty-free treatment or if there's a phase-in tariff reduction. But I suspect that we can double-check if you give us the specific product following after this conference, but we can check and see whether it's immediate duty-free. But I suspect for environmental-related equipment, that type of product would be immediately duty-free.
And Anthony, you may want to address what people do if they have a question on how to identify or find the HS number for their item.
Right. Well, it's usually easiest to look it up with the Census Bureau's website for the Schedule B number, which is www.census.gov/Schedule B. You start with that number, and then you go through the process as I explained, especially for the environmental equipment. It'll just be what materials are used in manufacturing it, and whether you meet the product-specific rules.